Greetings, all Calfadians, in whatever country you may be viewing this talk. Calfad Global, the 50th Calfad, is a very special event in many ways. With COVID playing such a major restrictive role in all our activities, I'm sure we'd all like to congratulate the organizing committee and especially Ziquay for the extra effort that has been needed to make an international meeting of this kind possible. For some of you, it is already nearing your bedtime as you watch this. I hope I won't put you to sleep sooner than you would otherwise. For others of you, you're making an earlier start than usual. Some of you may be still sitting up in bed with your laptop propped on your knees, and maybe, if you've got out of bed, a coffee beside. I have the advantage that this talk is being recorded, and I've been able to choose an optimum time between my morning coffee and my evening whiskey. I want to start by saying that it is an honor and a privilege as one of the attendees at the very first CalFAD meeting to tell you about the origins of CalFAD, how Larry Kaufman, supported by Imo Ansara, provided great leadership and encouragement to the small number of scientists working at that time on the computer calculation of phase diagrams, encouraged them to come together to share their experiences in modeling and calculation methods so that the work of all could be accelerated and compatible data could be exchanged between those involved. So let's make a start. The title of my talk is 50 Years of CalFAD, and I'm going to be concentrating on the origins and early years. Others will be talking to you further about CalFAD and also the most recent exciting developments. Well, in terms of phase diagram calculations, the relations between the various thermodynamic functions and the equilibrium phase diagram of a binary system had already been described in detail by Van Laar in 1908. Carl Wagner also discussed a number of features of equilibrium diagrams and their relation to Gibbs energy, enthalpy, and entropy values in his book on thermodynamics of alloys, published in 1952. Those two references you can see at the bottom of the slide. However, it was only with a slowly increasing accumulation and accuracy of experimental thermodynamic data that more attention was given to the definition of phase boundaries in an alloy system by use of thermodynamic calculations. In these earlier years of the subject, before the advent of the computer or even the desk calculator, can you imagine there was such a time? Binary phase diagrams were, of necessity, derived by constructing common tangents to hand-calculated Gibbs energy curves using a ruler. Kubashevsky and Chart, from their background of experimental thermodynamic measurements and data assessment, best summarized this approach to phase diagram construction, and the reference is given below at the bottom of the slide, published in 1965. However, such a procedure clearly cannot be applied to systems of more than two components. In a three-component system, you need to define a tangent plane to Gibbs energy surfaces. That's not easily done in 2 dimensions with a ruler and pencil. As the amount of published experimental thermodynamic data increased, more research groups turned their attention to the definition of phase boundaries in an alloy system by use of thermodynamic calculations. By the end of the 1960s and in the early 1970s, a small group of international scientists were working independently on the computer calculation of alloy phase diagrams, using as basis the required consistency of experimental thermodynamic and phase boundary data. These were the very early days of the computer, and these pre-CalFAD scientists were performing what are now considered to be very simple phase diagram calculations by feeding computers which occupied entire rooms of large buildings with punched cards and paper tape. And I was one of those. I was feeding paper tape into an extremely large computer at the National Physical Laboratory in the UK. The early results of these first computer calculated phase diagrams were reported in sessions devoted to this topic at two meetings. The first in London in 1971, and the second in Münster in Germany in 1972. I'd like to just give you some information about the London meeting because our group at the NPL were hosts for this meeting. It really was a star-studded attendance of all those interested in metallurgical chemistry and thermodynamics at that time. And I just pick out some names. Carl Wagner, for instance, was there, who was regarded as the real authority in thermodynamics. There were great experimentalists. Klaper, with his calorimetric work, was doing a great job, as was Kubiszewski at NPL. And I'd mentioned his assistant, Bill Dench, who was constructing all the calorimeters that Kubiszewski was using. And there was experimentalists Komarek and Ferro, and John Elliott was also present, and F.D. Richardson, several from Schmalzried, several from the iron and steel area. Turk Dogan was, and who else can I pick out here? Well, you can see it was a star-studded field. And many of you have been using publications by these authors. Several of them have published books on thermodynamics. I just glancing through again, Nev Goxon and Claude Lupes, Rosenquist, others, many of them have now published books on thermodynamics which you are using as background in your work. Well, the session relating to phase diagram calculations at meeting was entitled Thermochemical Evaluations of Phase Boundaries and Equilibrium Diagrams. And it was chaired by Professor Knauker from the Technical University in Aachen in Germany. Plenary lectures were given by Kaufman, Larry Kaufman on the calculations of binary phase diagrams, and by Imo Ansala from University of Grenoble on the prediction of thermodynamic properties of mixing and phase diagrams in multi-component systems. There was a paper from Mats Hillert's group at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm in Sweden, given by Harvig, Nishizawa, and Uranius on the application of computer methods for optimizing the thermochemical evaluation of equilibrium data in ternary iron-carbon alloys. A paper by Schenk and Steinmetz, who published many publications in the iron and steel field. Their paper was on the thermodynamic properties of carbon-rich iron-carbon alloys. There was a paper from our group at NPL by Council Lees and myself on the computer calculation of phase boundaries in the iron copper nickel and the iron chromium nickel systems. Alan Prince talked about the computer-aided thermal analysis in the determination of phase relationships. And Lucas and Guy gave a talk on the stability functions in multi-component systems. All the papers at that meeting, not just those from that session, can be found in the volume on metallurgical chemistry, which is published by Her Majesty's Stationery Office, and it was from 1972, edited by Kubiszewski. Well, that meeting in London and the following one in Münster in Germany led to the formation of CalFAD. It was following these two meetings and propelled by the enthusiastic and inspiring leadership of Larry Kaufman coupled with the equally strong support of Emo Ansara, that the groups involved with the computer calculation of phase diagrams received the following letter. Here it is, sent on the 24th of May in 1973, almost 50 years ago. It was written by Larry Kaufman and Emo Ansara, Larry from Man Labs, Cambridge, Massachusetts, the USA, and Emo from the University of Grenoble in France. And it was sent to the groups at NPL and the Royal Institute of Technology, Mats Hillert in Stockholm, to Kubiszewski and myself, to Mats Hillert and Gernot Kirchner. And the subject was in the initiation of the working activities of the CalFAD, Calculation of Phase Diagrams, project. I'll read it out to you. This is history. The excellent meetings which we attended at Brunel in July 1971 and in Münster in September 1972 have led us to the conclusion that much would be gained by coordinating our current efforts in the calculation of phase diagrams. Thus, we are at present all using slightly different computer methods to obtain tie-line solutions. Moreover, we are probably using slightly different formulations of the excess free energy of solution. In some instances, the differences may be more semantic than real. In any case, if we are all employing equivalent computer programs and free energy equations, we could concentrate on the problem of defining the system parameters and achieve universal interchangeability of results. In order to progress towards such a goal, we propose to initiate the CalFAD project as a joint activity between the Man Labs, Grenoble, NPL, Stockholm groups, who are present actively pursuing individual efforts in this area. We believe that substantial progress could be made in a short period of time if we could arrange to work together for 1 week at one of our facilities to define the problems, disband, and carry out some individual activities, and meet again for a week at a second facility to compare results and chart future activities. Well, this was a very exciting invitation to form an international group and to achieve participation by NPL. It was first necessary to convince the authorities that this was something that NPL should be involved with. So it was my job, it fell to me to give reasons for support of the project. And here is what I wrote at that time. Such a project would be particularly timely in view of two important factors. Firstly, the compilations of binary alloy phase diagrams carried out by Hansen and subsequently in supplement form by Elliott and by Schunk are no longer being continued. I'm sure many, particularly the older ones of you, will still have those Hansen, Elliott, and Schunk's volumes tucked away somewhere on your library shelves. Anyway, those being discontinued, I say will leave a significant gap in metallurgical knowledge. And secondly, the tabulations of assessed thermodynamic data for binary alloy systems provided by Hultgren and co-workers have been discontinued this year. Since the phase diagram should be consistent with the published thermodynamic data of any system, it is of prime importance that compilation work in the two areas mentioned above should not proceed independently, but should be integrated in a project such as that envisaged. The inclusion of ternary and higher order phase diagrams in the planned output will be a further important contribution of the project, since no single up-to-date publication incorporates such information at the present time, despite the fact that most commercial alloys contain more than two components. Well, I'm happy to say that whether it was my description of the need or the authorities' own view of what was necessary. My participation in this at the instigation of Kubashevsky, who pushed me to be the representative, did happen. And the first CalFAD meeting took place. It was organized and hosted by Larry Kaufman at Man Labs in Boston, well, in Cambridge, which is a suburb of Boston, from the 5th to the 9th of November, 1973. It's of interest to note that the international attendees were accommodated in 3 double rooms. We were very economical at $29 a night, $29 per room, and 1 single room at $20 per night at the Fenway Cambridge Motor Hotel. The scientists invited to attend, apart from those who received the letter, were Imo Ansara and Claude Bénard from the University of Grenoble, Kubashevsky and Marin from the Technical University of Aachen. And I should point out that while the letter was sent out from Larry Kaufman, Imo, while Kubashevsky was at NPL, by the time it arrived, Kubashevsky had moved to the university in Aachen, where he was working closely with Marin and Knacker on thermochemical tables. Myself and Jack Council were invited from NPL Teddington, and Mats Hillert and Gernot Kirchner from the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And apart from Larry Kaufman, others invited to attend from the USA were Harvey Nessel, who was working with Larry at Man Labs, John Kahn, who was then at MIT before he moved to NIST, Dick Weiss, who provided the financial support for Larry Kaufman's work in this area, and the appropriate Army division, funding division, and Claude Lupis also attended some of the meeting from Carnegie Mellon University. Here are the people involved. In the middle, Larry Kaufman from Man Labs, Imo from the University of Grenoble, Mats Hillert, very much involved with the work from the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Claude Bénard from Grenoble, myself from NPL, Kubashevsky, now at the University of Aachen, but encouraged me to be the one to take part in this work, in this project, and Isam Marin, also from Aachen. Well, I have to say, the meeting was both stimulating and exhausting. Sessions over, I think it was 4 days, took place from 8 a.m. in the morning to 7 p.m. in the evening with no break in a windowless room to promote concentrated discussion. We worked through, but had lunch breaks, and these were the only slight distraction from the continuous animated scientific exchanges. As Iksan Barin expressed it later, it was a little like one might imagine a thief's kitchen to be, but in this case, with calculated phase diagrams being pushed around the table and 3 or 4 binaries being offered for 1 ternary. And I'm fortunate in being able to obtain recollections of CalFAD 1 from Claude Bénard and from Iksan Barin. I'll give you Claude Bénard's recollections in his own words first. The following observations were made by the 2 French participants after the first CalFAD meeting. It is important to recall that Imo and Claude were for the first time in the USA. We come in Cambridge not for tourism, but we do expect to see a little bit Cambridge and Boston. In fact, the meeting was done in a little room without windows, and I suspect that Larry wanted to make sure that the attention of the participants was perfect. The meeting started very early in the morning, and as we were in November, everything was dark. As for the end of the daily sessions, that was after 19 hours, and I should say, I think he means here 19 hours in 7 o'clock in the evening rather than after 19 hours of continuous discussion. Well, the dark was still there, always there. But in this latitude, we could easily imagine that in the meantime there had been light. Now, the second part of Claude's recollections is very important for a Frenchman. As for the lunch, the first morning, we expected a short expedition in a neighboring little restaurant. At 10 in the morning, there was no hope anymore. A little logo page circulated with a list of sandwiches and a list of juices and various waters, and of course, no beers. We could, like that, organize our gates. I think he means we were truly stunned. Larry was a charming guy, but the job was the job. For one evening, we were invited for a good dinner at Larry's house, and we played table tennis with his sons. Knowing that, you can just imagine Larry's situation 5 months later in Grenoble for the second CalFAD meeting. Emo had organized lunches in a nice restaurant on the hill, just over the campus. The travel and the lunch every day took around 2 hours. But the more difficult for him was certainly CalFAD 9 in La Sapinière, Quebec, where lunches and dinners were exceptional, but too much. And at the first presentation in the afternoon, in very deep armchairs, some participants, like my friend Jack, had problems to stay awake. I won't give further clues as to who Jack was. We'll let him keep his, save his embarrassment. And here are the recollections from the first CalFAD meeting from Aix-en-Barry. We, and by this he means Baring, Knaka, and Kubashevsky, published the results of our compilation of thermodynamic data in 1970. During the final phase of completing this book, I noticed that Janaf had already published a precursor of its comprehensive data book in the USA. In any case, my activity in thermodynamics led me to the group of experts who deal with the thermodynamics of inorganic material systems, first in Great Britain and France. After, I came to a meeting in Boston in 1973 and was very impressed by the knowledge, drive, and collegiality of Larry Kaufman and other participants. The foundations of CalFAD were laid at this meeting. There, in addition to many lively discussions about binary and ternaries, I can also remember an impressive lecture by Jay Kahn. The table tennis game in Larry Kaufman's house, as well as the many professional and personal conversations with Philip Spencer, Emo Ansara, and others remain in my fond memories. CalFAD has significantly expanded my knowledge and my contacts with many professionals in several countries. Well, what did we discuss at the first CalFAD meeting? Here is the agenda. For the pure elements, we were concerned with the lattice stabilities, and I will talk to you a little more about that. The lattice stability was a term originating with Larry, and we talked about the specific heat of the liquid phase of the pure elements. We talked about binary systems. And prior to the meeting, we had all been supplied, or we supplied each other, with experimental data for the 5 ternary systems that you can see there: cadmium antimony, chromium iron, titanium nickel, bismuth antimony, and chromium cobalt. And we were to carry out test calculations. What did we get for the phase diagrams of that, using our own methods? We also supplied each other with data for ternary systems. And in this case, the systems were cadmium, antimony, bismuth, aluminium, nickel, titanium, and iron, chromium, vanadium. And with the data for the binaries that we supplied to each other, the aim was, what methods did we use to link the binary systems to obtain the thermodynamic properties of the ternary? And what effect did the methods we were using have on the subsequent calculated phase diagram? And the main interest here was to see which of the different interaction models gave Well, did they give very different results, or did they give similar results? We also talked about substitutional and interstitial solutions and the need for a structure-dependent description of the interstitial positional entropy. We talked about magnetic contributions, and while none of us had at that stage incorporated magnetic description into the phase diagram calculations, we were aware of the work of Peter Miodownik at the University of Surrey. So we discussed this to some extent also. One of the biggest topics of discussion was notation. We were all using very different descriptions for Gibbs energy, everything, in fact. And we all understood that if we were to work together, we needed to develop a universally acceptable group of symbols. So to the lattice stabilities, which Larry Kaufman introduced, a major advance in the capability for wider use of thermodynamic phase diagram calculation techniques was provided by Larry Kaufman, who illustrated the importance and use of the concept of lattice stabilities in calculating phase diagrams. Lattice stability values are the differences in Gibbs energy between different stable and metastable crystallographic structures of an element as a function of temperature. And they allowed the equilibrium boundaries between the different phases of a system to be calculated more accurately. Indeed, Kaufman published an extensive set of data for the Gibbs energy differences between the FCC, BCC, and HCP structures of a large number of elements, and in particular, the transition elements. And these can be seen as well as regular and subregular parameters for many transition metal systems in the volume, in the book that he published with Kaufman on the computer calculation of phase diagrams. And here, for example, are Kaufman's enthalpy and entropy differences across the three transition metal periods. The same values being used for each of the set of transition metals. Well, the conclusions that we came to at the end of the first meeting, with regard to the pure elements, it was suggested that periodic reevaluation of the lattice stabilities of metals such as manganese and iron should be made. And manganese and iron were of particular interest, one not only because of the importance in steels, but because, of course, with those two elements, the magnetic effects needed to be taken into account also. And that was the intention of the group in proceeding further. Further attention should be given to the role of specific heat of the liquid phase in defining the free energy differences between liquid and solid over a wide range of temperature. In particular, the linear term in the high temperature specific heat should be analyzed. With regard to binary systems, the phase diagrams of cadmium antimony, chromium iron, titanium nickel, bismuth antimony, and chromium cobalt were calculated from the given sets of thermodynamic properties provided by the three independent centers, and the calculations were had been carried out using either equality of chemical potentials or minimization of the free energy of the system. The results showed at this stage that the calculated phase diagrams were in good agreement. With regard to the ternary systems, cadmium antimony bismuth, aluminium nickel titanium, and iron chromium vanadium, as I pointed out earlier, these were calculated using binary data and different interaction models to obtain ternary properties. The results obtained for cadmium antimony bismuth and iron chromium vanadium showed surprisingly good agreement using whether it was the Barguil's, Kohler or tube equations. However, there were differences between the phase diagram of the aluminium nickel titanium system, calculated using the Margules equation, or use on the one hand, or the Kohler and tube equations on the other. Here are for example, the results obtained for cadmium, bismuth, antimony, the various interpolation equations. Not a great deal of difference. Iron, chromium, vanadium, a little more difference, but still the same general phase boundaries obtained. In the case of the aluminium nickel titanium system at 1600 Kelvin, the Kohler and tube interaction models gave very similar results, but calculating that ternary section using the Margules type of interaction model, you wouldn't recognize that it was the same system. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with what the Margules and the Kohler and tube. I don't know, do you see my cursor? If I take any point in this ternary, the Kohler equation would take a point from the axis through that composition from each of the vertices and calculate from the points of interception on the binaries, from the vertices to the binary. The tube goes from one vertex through the point, chosen point, and then there is a constant composition for the element of that vertex, and the points of composition on the binaries are used to obtain the binary values. The Margules equation, on the other hand, results in, if you were to choose the same point, it takes points at essentially a right angle from that point to each of the binaries. Those are the points in the binary which are summed to give you the ternary. Very different procedure. Well, the conclusions from the first CalFAD meeting. In terms of the interaction models, as indicated in topic 3, the different interaction models can lead to significantly different results. For the cases considered, the Margules equation tends to lead to lower thermodynamic, that is, more negative thermodynamic values of mixing than those obtained using the Kohler or tube equations. An extensive discussion led to the proposal that the excess free energy of an interstitial solution be defined relative to an interstitial positional entropy, which is dependent on the structure. With regard to magnetic contributions to the free energy of substitutional alloys were considered. And the work of Professor Miodownik on this topic was discussed. It was proposed that he be invited to contribute at the next CalFAD meeting in Grenoble. With regard to notation, a very wide range of thermochemical notations were in use by members of the group. This led to difficulties in understanding and applying specific models, and it was suggested that an attempt be made to develop a universally acceptable notation in which unnecessary symbols would be avoided. As an aside, I had more difficulty than some of the others with this because NPL as the National Standards Laboratory had its own opinion of what notation should be and actually recommended others. So it meant working with two sets of notation, those wanted by NPL and those which others within CalFAD could understand. And here is a summary of the output from CalFAD 1. First of all, the CalFAD logo proposed by Emo, very beautiful and original and artistic. We all loved it. A report from CalFAD, Kaufman and Nessel from ManLabs, Hillett. By this time, Gernot Kirchner was not really active in this field anymore. Dick Weiss, the army financing gentleman for Larry Kaufman, Claude Lubitz, Cargny Gemelin, myself, NPL, Barin from Aachen, Claude Ben-Animans from Grenoble, and John Kahn at MIT. And the final item relative to the first meeting was sent out only 2 weeks after the conclusion of CalFAD, where Larry said to us, "I trust you've all arrived home safely by now and found your trip to Cambridge stimulating. I certainly enjoyed our discussions and I'm looking forward to the next meeting, which would take place not so long in the future, between the 29th of April and the 3rd of May 1974 in Grenoble." But I must have a drink. Well, this photo, in this photo, you can see many of the early CalFADians, and this would have been around the time of the second CalFAD meeting. It is very illustrative of the lively interactions which take place between scientists participating in CalFAD meetings. And these meetings, as well as contributions to the CalFAD Journal, of course, have been a major factor in the very rapid advances taking place in the field of computational thermochemistry. I'd like once again to point out who was there. As I say, this must have been very close to the time of the second CalFAD meeting. If you can see the cursor, I hope you can. You probably can't. Well, on the back row, left to right, is Peter Miodownik, Mats Hillert, Peter Miodownik, University of Surrey, Mats Hillert, Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Malcolm Rand from the Atomic Energy Authority in the UK, Claude Bernard, University of Grenoble. I'm afraid this is just an A and other. I am not sure who this is. Pierre-Yves Chevalier from Grenoble, front row Tim Chart from NPL, a young Busse Sundman with very beautiful black hair, Imo Ansara, Grenoble, Busse of course from Stockholm, Klaus Hack from Aachen, Bo Janssen from Stockholm, and Alan Dinsdale from NPL. And here, the author of Big Gas, Hans Leo Lucas, a program which many of you have used in your assessment and production of optimized parameters for alloy systems. Further early CalFADians, and I picked some of these because they have been major mentors and tutors and have published many articles which all of you are using still. Gerhard Indel from the Max Planck Institute for Eisenforschung in Düsseldorf contributed a lot in the area of magnetic contributions to phase diagram calculations. Taiji Nishizawa had a very important group in Japan producing many phase assessments of phase diagrams. Ishida and Otani and others were in his group. John Ogren, closely associated with Thermocalc and Dictra, of course, has been tutor to many students. Marko Hämäläinen from Helsinki University of Technology, remember very well, is now no longer with us, but his cheerful face was always such a welcome participant at CalFAD meetings. And Ursula Kadner, who's been involved in so many activities in the phase diagram calculation field and in ongoing activities, where many of you have interacted with. On the bottom row of the pictures of the photographs of those who've been responsible from early days in the development of software and databases, which you are all now using in many different places. Gunnar Eriksson, the author of SolGasMix and ChemSage, and now with FactSage. Klaus Hack from GTT Technologies, also one of the FactSage developers. Busse Sundman, who was one of the original developers of Thermocalc and now of OpenCalFAD. Arthur Pelton and Chris Bale were the authors of the original Fact System and now FactSage. Alan Dinsdale, MT Data from NPL, I should say Arthur and Chris, of course, at Montreal. Bertrand Chenet in Grenoble from Thermodata, author of Coach and Gemini. It's always nice to put faces to the publications and software and data that you're using. Well, with regard to the publication of CalFAD data, many of the regular and subregular solution parameters resulting from Kaufman's original assessments of a large number of transitional metal alloy systems were published in the CalFAD journal. This first appeared in 1977, some 4 years after the first meeting. And the CalFAD journal quickly became the major medium for presentation of critical thermodynamic assessments of individual alloy systems by the ever-increasing number of scientists involved in computer modeling and calculation of phase diagrams. The systems under investigation soon expanded from metallic alloys to other materials, and the FACT group in Montreal were at the forefront in presenting results for oxides and salts. The modeling required for their thermodynamic description became ever more sophisticated. To make use of the data, though, the individual assessments are wonderful in themselves, but they need to be combined with other assessments to be able to perform calculations for more complex systems. And here, I want to draw your attention to a very fortunate coincidence in time and in work of two projects. Firstly, of course, CalFAD, but also ongoing was a French-funded project to develop a thermodynamic data bank for inorganic substances. And this had been ongoing since 1969. The participants were NPL and AER Harwell in the United Kingdom, that's the Atomic Energy Authority, the National Physical Laboratory, the University of Grenoble and IRSID, the French Iron and Steel Research Lab, and the Technical University in Aachen in Germany. You will see that that is the identical group almost exactly to the one forming CalFAD, and the same scientists were involved in both. This originally French-funded project was joined later by the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, that's Sillert's group, and became the scientific group Thermodata Europe, SGTE, with funding from the European Union. This occurred in 1979. As I pointed out, members of SGTE were also committed CalFADians, and the resulting symbiosis contributed significantly to the subsequent development of many of the computational thermochemistry software and data packages now available commercially. The developers of FactSage, Thermocalc, MTData, Coach and Gemini, Bingus are, and others are or have been involved both in CalFAD and SGT activities. The SGT data for the elements, compiled by Alan Dinsdale, form an important basis for nearly all CalFAD type assessments of alloy systems carried out worldwide. And at this point, I would like to mention further the work of Lucas, because the significant advance in the thermodynamic assessment and calculation of alloy phase diagrams was achieved when the previous hand calculation procedure used to achieve consistency between experimentally determined thermodynamic and phase boundary values was superseded with the publication of the paper Optimization of Phase Diagrams by a Least Squares Method using simultaneously different types of data. Here's the reference, Lucas, Hennig, and Zimmermann in the very first CalFAD volume, in 1977. A similar parameter optimization software was written later by Janssen. And now just a little about thermodynamic data provision and assessment. The thermodynamic data needed for phase diagram calculations and as input data in parameter optimization software are not are often not directly available. This is in large part now particularly due to the very regrettable decrease in the number of laboratories carrying out thermodynamic measurements. Funding of thermodynamic measurements has been a major problem. And one of our speakers later in this meeting, Alex Nawrotsky, was very much involved in trying to change the situation. Anyway, with regard to missing data, the possibility and desirability of using first principle methods to obtain missing data for phase diagram calculations was recognized at an early stage in CalPHAD. And among the first theoretical physicists to take part in CalPHAD meetings were Pettifo, Hafner, Sommer, and Miedema, to mention a few. Many others have participated in CalPHAD later. However, a word of warning. The situation concerning the provision of unknown values means that there is a real and ongoing danger of assessment work being carried out by talented scientists with sound analytical skills, but an inadequate first-hand knowledge of the experimental or theoretical difficulties associated with the use of the sophisticated software they're using. Well, as CalPHAD work progressed, and as more information became available on modeling and calculation techniques, I would like to point out in particular that while various projects came into operation and small action of scientific research projects, a major action took place in Europe called the Cost Action 507. It started, well, I guess, just under 20 years after the original first CalPHAD meeting, but shows what progress had been made. And this action, entitled Measurement and Evaluation of Thermochemical and Thermophysical Properties to Provide a Database for the Development of New Light Alloys. This started its life as a proposal which I wrote from SGTE to the European Union to try and obtain funding to develop a database for light metal alloys. Well, the authorities in Brussels thought that this was a good proposal, but that it was far too small, and that there were many research groups scattered around the European Union who could contribute in many ways to it, other than just producing a database. So what happened was I was asked to expand the proposal and incorporate different types of research classified under the following coordination groups. Firstly, experimental thermodynamic investigations. Secondly, phase diagram evaluations and compilations, that is classical phase diagram studies and compilation of available literature information on phase diagrams. Thirdly, and this was where the project proposal originally started with SGT, thermodynamic assessments and calculations, which represented critical thermodynamic evaluation of relevant binary, ternary, and higher order alloy systems to produce a set of optimized coefficients for the light metal alloy database, which was the original proposal. And finally, a fourth group, which would be concerned with the measurement and compilation of thermophysical data. Well, you can see this could be and was a significant expansion of just this small topic. And indeed, it was recognized as being great interest by 14 countries. These signed their support of this proposal and their willingness to provide funding with the European Union of the action. The countries being Austria, Belgium, France, Finland, Germany, Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and there would be invited participation of the Bykov Institute of Metallurgy in Russia. And I assure you, it was quite an overwhelming experience going to Brussels and being in the auditorium with all the senior representatives from these countries and with interpreters, translators in booths all around, in glass booths all around the room. But anyway, it was successful and existed for 8 years between 1990 and 1998. And we were very fortunate and very necessarily obtained funding and sponsorship from the following industrial companies: Outokumpu in Finland, Pechiney in France, Hydro Aluminium, Elkem and Norsk Hydro in Norway, Alcan, Atomic Energy Authority Technology, TNN Technology, Anglo Black Horse and Rolls-Royce in the United Kingdom. So with the help of the industrial sponsors, key systems were selected for which experimental measurement and assessment was needed with regard to particular applications that those industrial sponsors were interested in. Here we have the key systems, and you can see what the elements are in each. There is overlap in several of them, so that the work could be defined with some overlap, and for cans, extrusions and automobiles, aerospace and transport, airframes and gas turbines. It was a major project, but very exciting because people doing different aspects of the work were able to sit down together. It was possible to define which experiments in particular, what information was available from those who already were compiling the phase diagrams, those who had information on the experimental data already available. We could sit down, define which experimental data were missing, define who had the experimental equipment to perform those experiments, and finally, the results could be supplied to those doing the critical assessment work and developing the database in computer form. Well, here's one key system and how it worked. It's concerned with the application of evaluated thermodynamic data for light metal alloy systems to casting and heat treatment processes. The key system was aluminium, copper, magnesium, silicon, with one or two other additional elements. And the partners in this particular group were the Institute for Inorganic Chemistry at the University of Vienna. They were carrying out activity and phase diagram studies. The Department of Metallurgy and Materials at the University of Leuven in Belgium, carrying out phase diagram studies. The Max Planck Institute for Metallforschung, the Institute for Werkstoffe in Stuttgart, they had calorimetric capabilities. Institute for Theoretische Erdkunde in Aachen. I was now in Aachen in Germany at this time, who were carrying out the thermodynamic assessment work. The Max Planck Institute for Metallforschung, the Metallurgisches Labor in Stuttgart, who were also carrying out assessment work with Leo Lucas's program. The Center for Thermochemistry and Microcalorimetry in Marseille also had calorimetric capabilities. Gosh, hasn't the world changed, and what is available now in experimental studies? The University of Minao in Portugal, who could provide activity data. Well, that was a major project, and it produced a massive amount of data for aluminum-based systems, magnesium-based systems, titanium-based systems. And those data, at the end of the project, were made freely available. The work is published and volumes provided by the European Union, available from the European Union. And the data form the basis of nearly all the light metal alloy databases, which you may all be using in Thermocalc, Panda, FactSage, MTData. The aluminum databases that you have there, the light metal alloy databases, certainly had as their basis the data from the COST 507 action. Well, I just wanted to show finally how things progressed in the early years. And here are some publications where you can see what was going on. And amongst these were the Ringberg workshops. And here, the first Ringberg workshop on unary data for elements and other end members of solutions. After this, we have the SGT casebook, Thermodynamics at Work, edited by Klaus Nack, published by the Institute of Materials. And the basis of all this are CALFAD assessments and application of CALFAD data to all sorts of materials problems and the development of materials. Here's a Ringberg workshop on thermodynamic modeling of solutions and alloys, computer simulations from thermodynamic data, materials production and development. And as you will see, this is some 20, 25 years after the very first CALFAD meeting. Another Ringberg workshop on applications of computer thermodynamics, use of thermodynamic software in process modeling, and new applications of thermodynamic calculations. Another Ringberg workshop on thermodynamic modeling and applications. So you can see the progress that has been made, not only in the systems available now, stored in databases, done modeling, better models, better calculation techniques, application in many areas. So what I would like to say in summary for those early years of CALFAD is that CALFAD can justifiably claim to be one of the major success stories in the field of materials development over the last half century. From a previous trial and error approach to the design or improvement of a process or alloy, the CALFAD method is now widely and routinely applied as an integral part of the development process. The savings in time and costs to produce a material of the required composition and phase constitution have been very significant. It should be emphasized that the rapid advances made by CALFAD owe much to the scientific stimulation resulting from the close collaboration maintained over many years by the relatively small but ever-increasing number of scientists participating in CALFAD meetings and using the CALFAD method. And as closing comments, I'd just like to say this. We know that advances in scientific research are made from the shoulders of those who have gone before. CALFAD can look back to the first meeting of just a handful of scientists in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and be proud of how far computer calculation of phase diagrams has come. In the other upcoming talks and presentations at CALFAD Global, we will hear about the present exciting developments that are taking the field further in the direction of materials development. All of you listening today are involved in these current activities, and in your turn are providing the shoulders for others to use as the field advances and expands over the next 50 years. Good luck with your work. Thank you very much.